The peace of California was shattered. The usual warm sunshine that lit up the busy streets and beautiful beaches, filled with people enjoying their day, was now overshadowed by worry and fear. The laughter that used to echo in open cafes slowly disappeared, replaced by hushed conversations about the fate of the victims. At schools, students discussed wild theories about who the killer might be, while parents became more protective, not letting their children out after dark. A series of mysterious murders had shaken the city's tranquility. Even in the most remote parts of town, people were on edge. Online news and social media quickly reported the discovery of victims' bodies found dead in their homes. Images of houses marked with yellow police tape replaced the usual bright image of California, known for its smiles and lively atmosphere. The police hadn't solved the case, even though the murders had been happening for months. The chief of police repeatedly appeared on TV, giving unconvincing statements that they were doing their best, but it wasn't enough to reassure the increasingly desperate residents. The police often cited the difficulty of finding evidence, but their inability to provide safety only added to the public's frustration. There were no signs of forced entry at the victims' homes. The doors were locked, the windows intact, and nothing was stolen. Everything seemed normal, except for one thing. The victims were found lifeless, with their faces frozen in indescribable terror. One by one, the bodies were found, as if attacked by some unseen force. With no clear evidence and no obvious motive, the investigation was at a standstill. Investigators worked day and night, gathering information, but it all led nowhere, as if they were standing at the edge of a bottomless cliff. Residents felt uneasy. Anxiety filled every street and home. Neighbors who used to gather in front yards now stayed inside, locking their doors early and peeking through their curtains. Suspicion grew. Was the killer an outsider, or could it be one of their own? Social media was filled with interviews of frightened locals, their anxious faces showing their loss of faith and safety. One housewife said she no longer let her husband come home late. A shop owner kept a baseball bat near the door for self-defense. The police continued to warn everyone to stay alert, while videos of patrol cars driving through the night became eerie. Their sirens no longer meant safety, but reminded everyone that the killer was still out there. The flashing red and blue lights reflecting off houses only heightened the fear. The long shadows of police cars creeping across the asphalt reminded everyone that the killer was still free, and no one knew who would be next. Everyone was looking for answers, trying to make sense of the scattered information. Online community groups were filled with conspiracy theories. Some suspected an outsider, while others believed a secretive group was involved. But no clue seemed to lead to the killer, as if they were a shadow that came and went without a trace, a ghost capable of taking lives without leaving evidence. Fear wrapped itself around the town, turning friendly faces into suspicious ones, and every alleyway that used to be a playground for children was now filled with whispers and worry. The once lively town of California had turned into a gloomy stage, where everyone waited in uncertainty, wondering when this terror would end. The latest murder involved a government employee known for being friendly and dedicated. His body was found inside his home, lying in an odd position on the sofa, as if he had been relaxing before something unseen took his life. There were no visible large wounds, no signs of struggle, just a cold, stiff body with eyes wide open in a blank stare. His eyes were still slightly wet, showing the fear he felt before dying. His face looked like he had seen something he wasn't supposed to, something terrifying. His hands rested limply by his sides, his fingers forming a half grip, as if trying to reach for something that wasn't there. Beside the coffee table, a cup of tea had been knocked over, its contents dripping onto the carpet, staining the old patterns. The room was too quiet, like a forced calmness after terrible chaos that left no trace. A faint smell of dampness mixed with tea made the room feel strange, like something was lurking in the shadows. The police investigating the case were baffled, their eyes scanning every corner of the room, looking for something they could never find. They opened drawers, checked windows, and knocked on walls, but nothing seemed out of place. No fingerprints, no forced entry. It was as if the killer had entered like the wind and left without a trace. The room's lights flickered as an officer searched, adding tension to the eerie atmosphere. One officer whispered to his partner, his voice sounding defeated. They had no idea how someone could be so clean, so invisible. The death seemed random, with no clear motive. There were no threats, no history of conflict. The man was just an ordinary employee living an ordinary life. This only added to the community's fear. If someone like him, a quiet government worker, could be a victim, then who would be next? Outside the victim's house, people gathered, their curiosity mixed with fear. Their faces hidden in the deepening shadows of night. They whispered as if afraid the killer might hear them. One thing made this murder even more mysterious: the eerie calmness around the crime scene. There was no noise, no mess, as if the killer knew exactly how to avoid being noticed. Even the neighbors heard nothing, no screams, no footsteps. It was as if the crime had been committed by someone who knew how to kill without leaving a trace and how to silence everything, leaving behind a cold, heavy quietness. This case quickly became the main topic of conversation. People discussed it in cafes and on college campuses. Morgan, a final year student at one of California's top universities, had been the pride of his family since childhood. The son of a senior police officer named Detective John Carter, Morgan was a bright, accomplished young man with a promising future. He had a friendly smile and slightly messy brown hair that gave him a relaxed vibe. On campus, Morgan was known for being smart, active in social activities, and well-liked. He had a kind heart, was honest, and always tried to help others. He encouraged his classmates, talked about dreams and goals, and spoke with sincerity. However, behind his seemingly perfect life, Morgan had a side not many people knew about. As the son of a detective, he had a deep interest in criminal investigations. This interest wasn't just because of his father, but also due to his curiosity and desire to make the world a better place. Morgan often discussed his father's investigations with his girlfriend, Susan, but she wasn't the only one who listened. Morgan also had 3 close friends at university, Jason, Emily, and Daniel, whom he regularly talked to about these cases. Jason was a computer engineering student fascinated by technology, with messy hair and thick glasses that made him seem eccentric. Among his friends, he was known as a good hacker, someone who liked to play with code and hacking but claimed he never used his skills for harm. Jason loved the technical aspects of the investigations, especially when it involved CCTV footage or security systems. He often joked about how easily he could track someone if he wanted to. Emily was a journalism student with neatly tied blonde hair and bright blue eyes. She always carried a small notebook. Emily was critical and unafraid to ask tough questions. She wrote articles for the campus media and was obsessed with the murders happening in California. For her, this case was a mystery that needed solving, and she often pushed Morgan for more information than she should. Her love for mysteries and her obsession with uncovering the truth made her a bit intense, but she genuinely wanted to reveal the truth for the public's benefit. Daniel, like Susan, was a psychology student, but he had a different approach. He had short black hair, dressed more formally than most students, and was quiet and calculated. He often gave deep analyses of human behavior. When Morgan discussed criminal cases, Daniel provided psychological profiles, predicting motives with surprising accuracy. Although he could be cold and overly analytical, his sharp understanding of killer behavior made him intriguing. Sometimes, it seemed like Daniel knew more than he should, as if he had access to secrets others couldn't guess. His insight into the killer's patterns made him mysterious. Susan, Morgan's girlfriend, was a smart psychology student. She had smooth skin, shiny black hair always neatly tied back, and a formal appearance. Behind her thin-framed glasses, her eyes showed intelligence and curiosity. She was known for being calm and attentive, always listening when Morgan talked. When Morgan shared his dreams, Susan responded thoughtfully, offering perspectives that made Morgan love her even more. To him, Susan was everything: a loyal listener, his best supporter, and someone he could always rely on. In her friend's eyes, Susan seemed innocent and simple, but her personality was magnetic. She never sought attention, yet her presence was always felt. She spoke with grace, and her soft voice had a calming effect. Her friends felt safe with her, comforted by her understanding. The story of the serial murders became a hot topic on social media platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Several accounts regularly discuss the murders, the most notable being a mysterious account called Anonymous. The account owner appeared in a hoodie that concealed most of their face, speaking with a calm demeanor. This account quickly gained attention for its detailed content about the murders in California. No one knew the owner's identity. They claimed it was for safety reasons. Each video was filled with sharp analysis, as if the owner had access to information no one else had. Every video ended with a message about staying safe in the face of an invisible threat. The owner's voice was soft yet cold, adding a mysterious tone that gave viewers chills. The messages felt like both a warning and a challenge. The popularity of Anonymous kept rising as people wanted to learn more about the threat lurking in their everyday lives. Hundreds subscribed daily, captivated by the mystery and fear. On the other side, the police, including Detective John Carter, Morgan's father, grew increasingly frustrated. The killer seemed incredibly smart, almost invisible, leaving no trace. Every lead disappeared like mist, and the evidence held no value. There were no fingerprints, no suspicious CCTV footage, and no witnesses. It was as if the killer was a shadow, silently entering the victims' homes. Time kept passing, but there was no progress, while the number of deaths continued to grow. Outside the police headquarters, the community demanded action. Small protests began, with worried and angry citizens gathering in front of the police station, holding signs calling for justice. Journalists flooded the station, asking when the killer would be caught. Detective Carter appeared more exhausted each day, struggling to explain that the investigation was ongoing. His face showed the pressure, with wrinkles on his forehead. The pressure wasn't just from the public, but also from high-ranking officials worried about their reputation. Tensions escalated when another murder occurred. This time, the victim was a famous musician who had started his career on YouTube. His fame made this case the top story across California. The media spread news of his death, leaving everyone shocked. How could a star, known for his warm smile and heartfelt music, meet such a horrifying end? His body was found in his apartment, in his private music studio, surrounded by instruments that now served as silent witnesses to his final moments. The once uplifting atmosphere of his studio was now mixed with the cold scent of death. A broken drumstick was lodged in his neck. The death of the musician became a major topic, and fear grew even more. If a famous celebrity could be a target, then anyone could. The anonymous YouTube account's popularity skyrocketed. People watched the videos hoping for clues. Comments flooded in, filled with speculation and fear. Meanwhile, the account owner remained hidden. The person behind Anonymous added another layer of mystery, and viewers' desire to know how it would all end grew stronger. The police were even more confused. Pressure from the media and the public was mounting. Detective Carter, usually focused, felt overwhelmed. He knew their time was running out. They had to catch the killer soon, before the next victim fell, and before the public completely lost faith. Yet, every attempt to find a connection between the cases failed. There was no pattern, no clear link between the victims, except that they were family men, but that wasn't enough. Amid frustration, Carter and his team started to suspect something worse. It felt like the killer was always one step ahead, as if someone was leaking their plans. They began to suspect a spy within their team, someone close to them. Meetings were held more discreetly, and they started to look at each other with mistrust. Carter himself wondered if someone had been betraying them all along. Seasonal winds swept through California, carrying the scent of drying leaves. During the day, the sun was still warm, but at night, the air grew colder, and a thin fog settled over the streets. This cold air brought the flu, leaving some residents feeling weak, while others walked with coughs, their faces hidden behind scarves. But it wasn't just the weather changing. The town was preparing for Halloween, but unlike past years, excitement was mixed with fear. Residents decorated their homes with pumpkins, skeletons, and spider decorations. Lights twinkled in the trees, trying to bring cheer to an atmosphere that felt tense. However, behind the laughter of children testing their costumes, parents whispered about the murders, wondering who might be next. This fear grew as night approached, and the shadows from the decorations seemed more ominous. The murders haunted California like a ghost, scarier than the fake witches and zombies. Behind the laughter, fear couldn't be hidden. It felt like an unspoken warning to stay cautious, as if Halloween might be the stage for true darkness. Some households took down decorations early, afraid of drawing the wrong attention. Others tried to ignore the fear, hiding their anxiety with lively celebrations. At Morgan and Susan's campus, Halloween excitement was everywhere. Students gathered to plan the event, setting up a stage for the costume show and turning a building into a haunted house. Students practiced in their costumes, some dressed as zombies, others in black robes and masks. On the surface, everything seemed cheerful and fun, like a perfect celebration to forget the grim news. This year's Halloween was expected to be full of fun, games, and laughter. However, beneath it all, something was wrong. While students focused on costumes and decorations, someone among them hid a secret darker than any ghost story. Someone who knew more about the darkness than anyone else. A shocking event occurred just before Halloween. Another murder took place, and this time, the victim was a well-known professor at Morgan and Susan's University. It was as if the killer had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike, casting a shadow over the upcoming festivities. Dr. Richard Collins, a beloved history professor, was found dead in his office. His face, usually bright when discussing ancient civilizations, was now twisted in terror, leaving a lasting impression on anyone who saw it. The murder was tragic and brutal. Dr. Collins was found tied to his office chair, his hands and feet bound tightly. His face was bruised, and a long cut ran down his cheek, inflicted slowly. Deep marks on his wrists showed he had struggled to free himself. On his desk, his morning teacup lay overturned, its contents spilled on student papers. The small office, filled with books and maps, was now a horrifying scene. Books had fallen, papers were scattered, and a broken clock hung crookedly, its hands stopped at an uncertain time. The half-open window let in a breeze, causing curtains to flutter, casting shadows on the walls, like something dancing in the darkness. A small note was found on his desk, written in Dr. Collins' handwriting, but it was just a fragment, offering no clues. The tragic death of Dr. Collins quickly spread across campus, turning the planned Halloween celebration in the courtyard into a somber gathering. Laughter and jokes about costumes and decorations were replaced by gloomy faces. The event was moved indoors to the main hall, supposedly safer. The students' disappointment was clear. Weeks of preparation were overshadowed by grief. The large hall was decorated, but everything felt muted, quieter, and devoid of its original excitement. The anonymous YouTube account covered the event again in one of its latest videos. In the video, Anonymous described Dr. Collins' death, explaining how the murder seemed carefully planned and how the killer managed to escape without leaving any trace. This time, though, there was something different. The video showed several new clips, footage of the Halloween preparations on campus. It included students decorating the hall, setting up tents, and various corners of the campus covered with fake spider webs and plastic skulls. No one remembered being filmed, raising questions about who could have recorded it and why. Anonymous, known for its accurate and inside information, had a reputation for exposing secrets, which made this footage even more unsettling. The idea that someone had been secretly watching them added tension, suggesting the killer might have been present long before the crime. A big question then arose. Who recorded these scenes? No one realized they were being filmed. Could the owner of the anonymous account be one of them? Someone they trusted, maybe even Morgan, Emily, or Jason? Was the culprit hiding in plain sight, closer than anyone thought? The footage created immediate tension and suspicion, spreading quickly among the students and staff, who began to look around more cautiously, wondering who among them might be involved in the string of murders. The police and investigation team conducted an intensive investigation into Dr. Collins' murder. His office was cordoned off with yellow police tape across the door, a stark warning for everyone to stay away. Signs of the investigation were still evident. Fingerprints were taken from various parts of the room. Forensic footprints left marks on the floor, and an eerie silence filled the space that was once full of Dr. Collins' energetic presence. His absence left a void among the students and faculty, who felt the loss of his warmth and passion for teaching. Students walking by the faculty building often glanced toward the office, which now seemed like a dark reminder of the unsolved mystery. After a thorough investigation, the police requested that the campus cancel the planned Halloween celebration. This decision disappointed the students, especially Morgan and his friends, Susan, Emily, Daniel, and Jason, who had eagerly prepared for the event, hoping for a break from the stress surrounding the town. The cancellation was a harsh reminder that fear had fully invaded their lives, ruining what was supposed to be a joyful occasion. Morgan felt the disappointment deeply. He had worked hard to prepare for the event, planning, decorating, and picking out the perfect costume. Emily didn't hide her frustration. She had big plans to cover the Halloween event for the campus media, hoping to create an engaging article filled with fun stories and spooky tales. Even Jason, usually laid back and always joking, couldn't hide his disappointment. He kept grumbling about how fear had finally won. To him, Halloween wasn't just a fun event. It was a time when they could all laugh at their fears and the lurking darkness. Daniel, who was usually calm and analytical, seemed more lost in thought than usual. He didn't complain much about the cancellation, but the look in his eyes made it clear that he felt the same sense of loss as his friends. Despite their disappointment, Morgan took charge, determined not to let Halloween be completely ruined. He rallied his friends to gather at his house, which was spacious and on the outskirts of town, for a small celebration on Halloween night. While it wouldn't have the same atmosphere as the campus event, Morgan's enthusiasm helped keep their spirits high. He offered to set up decorations in his living room, hang some orange lights, and even make extra costumes determined to ensure they still had a memorable evening together. Meanwhile, the police investigation team finally found a small breakthrough. This time, the killer of Dr. Collins seemed to have made a mistake. On one of the thick books on Dr. Collins' desk, forensic officers discovered a small trace of mucus, likely from a sneeze. The mucus had landed on the corner of a page, barely visible among the handwritten notes. The recent unpredictable weather in California had caused many residents to catch colds, and it seemed the killer was no exception. This unexpected clue was the first physical evidence that could directly link the killer to the crime scene, potentially breaking the case wide open. Carefully, the officers collected the sample and sent it to the forensic lab for analysis. The process took a long time, requiring precision to ensure no evidence was missed. They analyzed the DNA in the mucus and compared it with the data they had on record. Tension was high among the forensic and investigation teams as they awaited the results. This was the breakthrough they had hoped for after months of working without significant leads. When the lab results came back, the officers realized the mucus wasn't just a clue in Dr. Collins' murder. Upon further examination, they found a match with biological samples from previous crime scenes, samples that had initially been too small to connect. A similar trace had been found at a previous victim's home, but at the time, it was too minimal to yield conclusive results. Now, with a clearer sample, they could finally make the connection. Clues began to emerge, like pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered and hard to connect. The police noticed a pattern in all the murders. Each victim, though they appeared unrelated, had something in common. They were all family men who seemed to have secrets they didn't want the public to know. After thorough investigation, the police found hints that suggested a possible motive tied to the victims' personal lives, something pointing to a personal grudge rather than random killings. Moreover, the timing of the murders, the way the killer accessed the victims' homes, and the method of killing all showed a consistent pattern, almost like a ritual. However, there were no signs of cult activity or occult motives. Instead, the motive felt personal, as if the killer had a vendetta against men like the victims, someone seeking to punish them in a specific way. The investigative team's findings connected the crime scenes that had previously seemed unrelated. Every small detail that had been overlooked started to make sense, and piece by piece, the puzzle began to form a picture pointing toward one individual. The police identified a suspect, but to keep the investigation confidential, no information was leaked to the public. Even within the police force, only a select few knew about the findings. Morgan, Susan, Jason, Daniel, and Emily were enjoying a simple Halloween celebration in Morgan's living room. The house was filled with festive decorations, even though the event wasn't as formal as the original campus celebration. Jacko, lanterns lined the corners of the room, candles cast dim light, and cheerful music mixed with their laughter. They sat in a circle on the carpet, sharing horror stories. But Susan seemed less enthusiastic. She looked pale, with dark circles under her eyes, and her smile appeared forced. "Are you sure you're okay, Susan?" Emily asked, raising an eyebrow. Susan weakly nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around her. "Yes, probably just the flu. I'll be fine," she replied with a hoarse voice, forcing a faint smile. At first, Susan had declined the invitation because she wasn't feeling well, but Morgan's begging made her agree. "You know, it wouldn't be the same without you, Suze," Morgan had pleaded gently, and eventually, Susan gave in, though she felt a heavy unease she couldn't explain. The night seemed normal until suddenly, the sound of police sirens echoed outside Morgan's house. Everyone froze, exchanging confused glances. The loud bang of a door opening broke the silence, followed by hurried footsteps. "Morgan, is that your dad?" Jason joked, trying to lighten the mood. No one seemed alarmed at first. After all, they knew Morgan's father was a police detective, and police cars weren't unusual. But the tension rose when they saw police cars surrounding the house, the flashing red and blue lights casting eerie reflections on the walls. Morgan stood up, frowning, and opened the door with a smile. "Dad? What's going on?" "It's Halloween. You should join us," he said, trying to ease the tension. But when he saw the serious, tense expression on his father's face, the smile faded. Behind his father, several officers moved quickly, entering the house with caution, their hands on their weapons. Emily, Jason, and Daniel stood up, looking around in disbelief. "Did someone get into trouble?" Jason asked, trying to sound calm, though his voice betrayed him. Detective Carter took a deep breath before saying, "We need to arrest Susan for the murder of Dr. Collins and the other killings." The words hit the room like a bomb. Everyone fell silent, the atmosphere suddenly heavy, as if the air itself had thickened. "What?" Morgan gasped, his face pale. He looked at his father, then at Susan, who was still sitting on the floor, staring blankly. "Dad, this has to be a mistake." Susan couldn't. "This doesn't make any sense." Morgan pleaded, moving closer to Susan, standing protectively between her and the officers. Emily and Daniel stared wide-eyed, fear etched on their faces, as if they were witnessing a nightmare come to life. "Morgan, what does this mean?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Jason stood frozen, his gaze shifting between Susan and Morgan, hoping it was some terrible joke. Susan remained silent. Her innocent face now seemed like a mask, but there was no effort to defend herself. No tears, no denial. She just looked at Morgan, her tired eyes filled with something beyond understanding. "Susan, say something. Tell them they're wrong." Morgan pleaded, his voice rising in desperation as he grabbed her shoulders, shaking her gently. Susan held Morgan's gaze for what felt like an eternity before letting out a soft sigh. "Morgan, she began, but her voice broke as though the words she wanted to say were too heavy. She lowered her head, staring at the floor, as if there was nothing more she could say. "Miss Susan, stand up and come with us," one of the officers said firmly. Two officers stepped forward, gently taking Susan by the arms, while Detective Carter stood watching, his expression difficult to read, his eyes filled with a pain deeper than Morgan's. "Wait, Dad, please!" Morgan shouted, trying to stop them, but his father placed a hand on his shoulder. "Morgan, that's enough," his father said, his voice heavy with emotion. "We have evidence. This isn't a mistake." Emily began to sob quietly, covering her mouth, while Jason stood frozen, unable to speak. Daniel turned his face away, avoiding eye contact, as if he didn't want to witness what was happening. "Susan, it can't be," Daniel muttered, more to himself than anyone else. This must be a misunderstanding." But Susan didn't resist. She stood up slowly, her cuffed hands in stark contrast with her simple clothes. Her usually calm face now appeared empty, as though she had let go of all her emotions. She glanced at Morgan one last time, a faint, painful smile crossing her lips. "I'm sorry, Morgan," she whispered softly. And with that, she was led away, leaving Morgan and the others with broken hearts and unanswered questions. Morgan collapsed onto the floor, his gaze vacant. He stared at the door that had just closed behind Susan, feeling as though his world was crumbling. "This can't be," he whispered repeatedly, his voice barely audible. Emily crouched beside him, trying to comfort him, though tears continued to stream down her face. "Morgan, we'll find out what really happened. We'll figure it out," she said, her voice filled with determination. But none of them knew what to do next. The Halloween night, which was supposed to be filled with fun and laughter, had turned into a nightmare. Each of them was engulfed by confusion and horror, as the shadow of Susan, the person they thought they knew, disappeared into the night. Something terrifying had been revealed, and they knew their world would never be the same. Early November in California was cold, the winter air creeping in, leaving a chill not only in the weather, but also in the hearts of those who knew Susan. The cold wind blowing through the fallen leaves mirrored the emptiness felt by Morgan, Daniel, Jason, and Emily. Every corner of the campus, once full of laughter and life, now felt eerily quiet, as if the spirit of joy had left with Susan. The warmth they once felt was now just a distant memory. They never imagined that the girl they knew, the one who smiled, who listened patiently, who gave wise advice, was the same person who had become California's worst nightmare. As the truth came to light during the interrogations, their hearts shattered beyond just a sense of loss. From the evidence found at Susan's home, there was no room for doubt. The police found detailed notes about her victims, addresses, routines, even their darkest secrets. In the corner of Susan's room, they discovered a desk with a map of California, marked with notes pointing to her targets. During her interrogation, Susan eventually confessed. She spoke in a calm tone, like a student giving the correct answer to a teacher's question. She was the serial killer who had terrorized the city. All of her victims were married men who had cheated on their families. They deserved it, Susan said with a vacant look during the interrogation, a chilling smile forming on her lips as if she felt no remorse. The officers in the room felt a chill, despite the warm room. The truth Susan revealed wasn't just about the murders, but also the reason behind each act, a deep hatred rooted in her heart, grown from her childhood trauma. From Susan's confession, a tragic story emerged. She spoke of her father, a man who had once meant everything to her, who left their family for another woman. She described how her mother cried at night, comforting a young Susan who kept asking where her father was and when he would return. Those years shaped Susan, planting a seed of resentment that grew with her. When she was old enough to understand, when she saw her mother struggling as a cashier to pay rent, that resentment turned into a dark desire to punish men who, like her father, betrayed their families. Her mother was a hero in Susan's eyes, a strong figure who never gave up, even when misfortune struck again. Her mother was hospitalized after being hit by a car on her way home from work. The hospital bills and living expenses seemed impossible to manage, and Susan, a brilliant student struggling to survive, had to find a way. She started creating content on YouTube, launching the Anonymous account. But Anonymous wasn't just a way to earn money. It became a manifestation of Susan's hidden side, filled with anger and a desire for revenge. Every married man who cheated was a reflection of her father, someone who deserved punishment. The Susan everyone knew, the quiet, attentive girl, was different from the Susan behind the screen, who watched these men, marked them, and planned their deaths with chilling calm. At night, when the city was quiet, Susan would sit in front of her laptop, uploading videos to Anonymous, coldly analyzing her own murders while warning the public to stay vigilant. In her cell, Susan sat behind bars, her eyes staring blankly at the cold wall. There was no regret, only exhaustion on her face. "I just did what no one else could," she whispered. There were two people inside her. One who wanted to love, to be a good girlfriend to Morgan, to laugh with her friends. And another who wanted to punish, to bring justice for her mother, and to avenge the unfairness she experienced. These two sides coexisted for so long that Susan no longer knew where one ended and the other began. Sometimes she couldn't even remember what she had done as Anonymous, as if that persona was someone else borrowing her body at night. Morgan, watching all this unfold, felt his life crumble. His world was falling apart. The woman he loved, whom he trusted more than anyone, turned out to be dangerous. Someone who used his love to gain access to his father's secrets. Morgan couldn't sleep, his mind filled with memories of their time together, wondering when Susan had changed, when it all went wrong. He remembered her smile, the touch of her hand, the attentive look in her eyes. Was it all a lie? On campus, Daniel, Jason, and Emily were struggling to come to terms with this reality. Emily, usually confident, now seemed lost, her eyes red from crying. Jason, who always found humor in every situation, was now silent. He stared at his laptop, watching the last video from Anonymous, trying to find any signs he had missed. Daniel tried to analyze it all, but this time, there was no answer that satisfied his logic or emotions. He watched the footage of that night repeatedly, the moment Susan was taken away, asking himself how they had missed the signs. Susan was eventually taken to a psychiatric hospital for evaluation. The police were confident they had caught the culprit, that the terror was over. But there, in the quiet room, Susan gazed out the window, a faint smile crossing her lips. She whispered softly, "They deserved it." The words echoed in the silence, as if another presence inside her agreed, still alive. As the night deepened in California, cold winds blew, shaking the trees and casting dancing shadows on the windows. People were beginning to move on, trying to forget the terror that haunted them. But a lingering sense of caution remained, a fear that wouldn't fade easily. The question still hung in the air. Was it really over? Had Susan, with her intelligence and split personality, truly given up? Or was Anonymous still out there, waiting for the right moment to return? In the freezing silence of the night, no one knew for sure, and that was the most frightening part of all.